Hello, everyone, and welcome to CSM Mastermind. My name is Angelika O'Reilly, and I am the head of customer success here at Success Hacker. I am filling in for Andrew Marks, our esteemed co-founder, who is feeling a little bit under the weather today. So we are back for our monthly live webcast today, and we are discussing how to utilize storytelling in customer success. This free learning event is being hosted by Success Coaching, the team that brought you the first accredited customer success professional development training program. Coming up on May 22nd through the 24th, we will host our very popular 3-day CCSM Level 1 virtual bootcamp. And you are welcome to take $300 off by using the promo code CSMCamp-300. Also, our 10-week data-driven decision-making for customer success coaching program taught by our esteemed partner at Powers starts on June 2nd. And you're also welcome to take $100 off with the promo code DDM-100. Ashley will drop both of these codes in the chat for you, so feel free to copy and paste them. To find out more about our training and coaching offerings, please visit us at successcoaching.co. For those of you who haven't participated in one of the events before, this is a live and unscripted discussion where we dig into a single topic relevant to customer success. Regardless of the company you work for, the details of your customer-facing role, or the size of the customers you deal with, we pick topics that are going to be practical and useful to you. The schedule of our upcoming CSM Mastermind events and our public training courses can be found at successcoaching.co under the Events Calendar tab, so feel free to check those out. Before we begin, here are a few housekeeping items that I would like to remind you of. First, the recording of the session will be available early next week on our website. Next, please place your questions in the Q&A panel at the bottom of your screen. Attendees are given the ability to upvote, so please upvote any questions that you would like to see answered by our panelists today. Lastly, please keep all chat and commentary in the chat panel. There's a lot of thought leadership out there, along with a lot of theories about how to deliver customer success. This series allows us to focus on the practical and give you real-world advice, tips, techniques, and shared experiences from those out in the wild that are practicing customer success on a daily basis. To do that, we invite 3 participants from the customer success community to join me for a roundtable discussion. These are the people that have been recommended to us as being great at their craft and ask them to share their experiences and perspectives. We'll be taking questions later during the webcast. So please use that Q&A functionality found at the bottom of your screen to ask a question. I am very excited to welcome our panel for today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So let's get started with Brooke. Why don't you introduce yourself first?
Great. Thank you, Angelika. Hey, everybody. Brooke Simmons, dialing in from Southern California. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Brooke Simmons Consulting, which is a customer success consulting advisory and management company that we just started this year. Prior to hanging up my own shingle this year, I have been a customer success leader at early stage startups for over a decade. I got into startups through management consulting, incidentally, which is a story in and of itself. But I grew to love the opportunity to build, grow, and then scale customer success, support, professional services teams, and then ultimately found value consulting practices as well. So a lot of my experience comes from on the ground, joining a company day zero and going, do we have a list of customers? Does anybody know where the contracts are? To figuring out, what do we do now that we're at 100 million ARR and what do we need going forward? So really fun experiences and excited to share today.
Love it. Thank you so much, Brooke. Nick, you're up next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nick Mijic, and I'm one of the co-founders of Matic.io. And what we do at a high level is we automate data-driven content within PowerPoint, Google Slides, with even email. And we work with customer success and sales teams to automate things like business reviews, renewal decks, things that you're going and telling a story with data. So prior to starting Matic, I was at LinkedIn, and before that was also at a few startups, one which was a customer success software startup. And my background has always been in a support function. So I've always supported customer success and sales from an ops standpoint. So trying to find ways to automate day-to-day activities, as well as just helping put together analysis and data that can help with better business outcomes like renewals, upsells, and you name it. So looking forward to the conversation today.
As are we. And Brooke, Nick, I love that you have both done the entrepreneurial route, but also have worked at SaaS tech companies and then spun off on your own. Thank you, Nick. And last but not least, Clay.
Hey folks, Clay Telfer. I'm in Los Angeles, and I'm currently the Director of Customer Success at Kraft & Bauer. But similar to Brooke, I've been doing customer success for more than 12 years now, building, scaling, and leading departments, usually at early stage startups that have little to no success function. So why should you listen to me, which is really the part you care about in my biography? Because of my last 4 companies, 3 of them have been acquired. I have a 2019 CXPA award, and if you go to my LinkedIn page, you will see a long list of churn reductions, revenue boosts, onboarding time reductions, and so forth. And I'm very excited to be here to talk to you guys about storytelling, which is a major passion of mine.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Clay. And yes, after today's webinar, definitely LinkedIn these amazing thought leaders and connect with them. So let's get started for our topic for today. As customer-facing individuals, each one of you plays a pivotal role in not only ensuring that our customers achieve their desired outcomes, but also in building enduring relationships with them. Today, we are going to explore a powerful tool that can enhance these relationships and create a lasting impact. Storytelling. Storytelling is not merely about narrating an interesting tale. It's also about connecting with your audience on a deeper level, fostering empathy, and effectively conveying your message in a way that resonates with them. It's about creating a narrative that our customers can relate to and see themselves a part of. This skill, when leveraged properly, can significantly improve the way we communicate with our customers and other team members within our organization. Now, to start our discussion, I'd like to ask all of you this. When do you use storytelling?
I'll take this one. And I think the thing is that you're always using storytelling. And even you might not recognize it, but you're always using storytelling because storytelling is how we communicate. And people often think about you storytell to your direct reports, to your managers, to your customers, but especially with customers, I think people often underestimate how often you're storytelling in those interactions because the answer is in every one of them. And I always say, here's like the dirty little secret of customer interactions. Every time your customer reaches out to you with a question or they need help with something, they are really asking you the same question every time. Will I live happily ever after? And whatever response you are giving them, whether you realize it or not, is you are telling them the story of them. Angelika, I'm going to tell you the story of Angelika. And that customer is really just hoping that this story is going to end with, and Angelika lived happily ever after. And in every interaction, you have to think about, how is my response showing the customer the journey to that place where they have reached all their goals and life is beautiful?
Clay, I love that. Now, when I get customer emails, the first thing I'm going to think of when I reply is, how are they going to live happily ever after with my reply? So thank you for that.
Game changer, I'm telling you.
Fairy tale way of thinking about it. I love that. Clay, Brooke, Brooke and Nick, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think just to reiterate what Clay mentioned, I think storytelling can be used in a variety of ways, right? Whether it's internal or external. I think with dealing with our customers externally, I think you use storytelling across all different touch points within the customer lifecycle. And to Clay's point, I think it is imperative that you do bring your customers along on the journey. I think that's the whole point of storytelling, is to bring them on a journey and then ultimately help you foster trust with your customers, right? So if you do it the right way and you go about it the right way, then you should be building that connection, that trust with your customer, which then hopefully leads to better outcomes, right? Which is, living happily ever after, right? Or, whatever the objective or goal that they had in purchasing your product or service, you want them to be able to go on that journey and then realize and achieve that particular goal or objective.
That's perfect. Brooke?
One thing I would add is if you don't share the story, right, of the happily ever after, of here's the before and here's what happened and here's what your happily ever after is going to look like, or here's what the future could look like, the person you're talking to is going to be trying to create their own story in their own mind. And their story could be then different from yours. So doing the work up front to think about what's the story and the message I want this person to take away from our interaction. And like Clay and Nick said, it's almost every interaction, right? What's the message and the takeaway I want them to have? Do I want them to walk away feeling something? Do I want them to walk away and do something? Do I want them to walk away inspired or scared or excited? What do I want them to feel? When you think that through, you have a much higher likelihood of getting to the outcome, hopefully a shared happily ever after in customer success, because so many of our outcomes are dependent upon other people taking action. If we don't step in and tell the story, your customer is going to create their own story. And sometimes that can be really surprising in a bad way, right? It can be a very different story than we were trying to tell, or a different outcome than we were trying to get that customer to.
Yeah, what you're saying really resonates with me. I know there's been scenarios when the customer has a different direction that they're headed, and then you're caught off guard, you're surprised by it on the Zoom call, but through storytelling, you can redirect them based on that, as Nick mentioned, that desired outcome you want to achieve. So it can help you bring you back to the drawing board, looking at upsell, expansion opportunities, whatever that value add is through a new narrative.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like if you aren't telling your customers a story, then they're going to tell themselves their story. And you don't know if that has a happy ending or a happy ending for them, but an unhappy ending for you, or an unhappy ending for everyone. So that you really have to provide that story so that they don't write one with a not so happy ending.
Yeah, and I think to that point, Clay, asking discovery questions and having active listening and asking the right questions can help also state, like, what story should I be drafting or narrating based on what they're looking to achieve, or digging a little bit deeper. Brooke, were you going to say something? Or Nick?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think Brooke alluded to something really, really good, which is, the story and the way you go about it will probably differ based on persona, right? Like, you really need to know your audience. Are you talking to an executive? Are you talking to a champion? Are you talking to an end user? And I think based on that persona, you may alter the story accordingly. So just knowing that up front is really good before you put together that outline.
Exactly. So in what ways can we incorporate storytelling in our regular customer interactions? Who wants to take this one?
I'm happy to.
I'll go. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I'll commit and do it. Okay. I used to think of storytelling as such a negative thing. I used to think that it was salesy and like code for you were trying to sell something. And so it had this really negative connotation in my mind, like I was being somehow disingenuous or untruthful because I was storytelling. And I really had to parse in my own head that me telling the story is helping somebody come along the journey with me, as opposed to me just painting whatever picture I wanted and then telling the customer, here's how it is, with no sense of empathy or validation or checking in with them. And so when I'm thinking about bringing storytelling into interactions, a lot of it's rooted in how can I make sure my customer understands where I'm at, and how do I check on their understanding? So if I'm talking to a customer about data, right? It's okay. So what was this before? What is the data showing us? What should you take away from this? And then how do you feel about that? And checking in on emotion. If I'm pitching my services to somebody, right? I need to understand your current state. And so I need understanding. And then I need to say, here's how I can help. And here's how I've helped other people. And how do you feel about that? Right. And so taking them along that journey with me versus, getting up on a soapbox and just telling a story and then being like, great, everybody good? Okay. And moving on with my day is really different. And I think it took me a long time to realize that you can craft a perfect story and narrative, and that's a great place to start. But you need to check in throughout the storytelling process to say, are you on this journey with me? Does this resonate? Does this make sense? Does this feel like your organization? Do you see these same challenges? And having those active listening skills you mentioned, Angelika, and then checking in on discovery, I think we've mentioned as well, are huge pieces of this.
Yeah. And Brooke, I think one of the things that I'm taking away from what you're saying is also making the customer the hero or the protagonist of the journey and putting them in that role so that they're like, oh, I can relate to this. This could be me in this journey through that story.
Absolutely. I think when I didn't realize until honestly, even prepping for this, when I sat down and said, every time I'm talking to somebody, especially in a customer success perspective, you're trying to get people to change their behavior often. And any parent knows you can't change anybody else's behavior. And that's a very freeing realization. You can't change anybody. They have to want to change themselves. And part of that is they have to create their own story about why change. Why should I adopt this technology? Why should I support purchasing this technology? Why should I tell my boss that this is going really well? Why should I stick my neck out for it or defend the spend on this technology? There's all of these different moments where they have an opportunity to be a hero, and how they craft a story around this is the impact of the technology in my relationship with my vendor or things like that are huge parts of it, but they have to be the hero. They're the only person that can do those things, no matter what we do from a customer success standpoint.
Exactly. Nick, were you going to chime in on that?
Yeah, I think, just to kind of echo a very similar thought is that, I think us as customer success individuals, like it's our job to go ahead and prescribe some sort of a narrative or story, right? We want to be able to dictate that narrative, but to what Brooke mentioned, it is something in which we need to get input from our customer, and we need them to feel like they are helping us write that narrative. And I think that collaboration is very, very important in our interactions to then ultimately achieve the goals and objectives that we have set with our customers. So I 100% agree. I think being able to have them, every step in the journey, right, getting their input, seeing if there's anything that is wrong in terms of expectations, or did you think of this differently, right? Like, what did you have in mind? I think those are very important factors to consider, and making sure that your customer feels like they are contributing to the story. But it is I would say, a delicate balance, because we do want to prescribe. So I think you should be the starting point, prescribe the narrative, help with the storytelling, but then using your customer as a way for input to refine and make it better.
Yeah. I know that we talk about the 5 core ways of storytelling. And like the first is creating a central theme or a purpose. Like, what is the message that we want to convey and relay? And the second is what we just talked about, being a hero or the target customer. Like, is it a persona that they can empathize with, knowing what that customer persona is, Nick, that you mentioned? The third being that mission or job that needs to get done through those open-ended questions, through the active listening. And then like, what are the obstacles that we need to turn into opportunities? And then ultimately creating that plot or strategy to help achieve that mission, and using that as like one of the frameworks to storytelling.
Something that I'll add to, and Brooke, I thought it was very interesting the way you talked about, having to become comfortable with storytelling, not as, kind of lying. And I had the exact opposite thing where I'm like, I always say I was like raised from birth to be a storyteller. So it's interesting to hear, sort of that other perspective, but also I think a way that we can think about this that sometimes people don't. And I see from some of the things in the chat, I think I see some of this. A lot of people think about like, storytelling and customer success, and they think of, hey, I'm going to tell Nick a story. I'm going to tell Brooke a story, right? Oh, they're having a problem, and to help them through that problem, I will tell them a story. That's a mode that I switch into, right? I am normally having a conversation, and then sometimes I tell a story. But really, I like to approach the entire interaction through the framework of a story, because like I said, you're building that story with them in every interaction. And even if you look at this panel, right, what was the first thing that we did when we started this panel is we went around and we all said who we were and essentially why are we qualified to be here, right? Why should you be spending your time listening to us? And this is in Star Wars. What's the first thing that Luke Skywalker does? They show you Obi-Wan Kenobi, and they establish that, like, oh, this guy knows a bunch of stuff that Luke doesn't, and they establish, hey, here's the person that our protagonist will be learning from. And that's what we're doing for all of you attending right now, right? Of, hey, you joined this panel, and we established that, and you're all going through this story here. So I think not that telling stories as sort of a discrete object is not valuable, because it very much is, but I think I would just encourage people to, in addition to thinking about that, also thinking, hey, how can I follow these storytelling frameworks in interactions that are not, the telling of a more formal story, if that makes sense.
It does. And this is a good segue to our next question for the panelists. How might we use these stories to help our customers visualize the potential impact and ROI of our products and services?
Yeah, happy to take this one. I think given my background in data, I've always supported, like I said, sales and customer success. I'm definitely a data nerd at heart. I do believe in whenever you're trying to tell value or ROI, I think data is a really, really big component of that. And I think as part of storytelling, you really have to think about the so what. What is the so what? I think what we tend to happen is we look at a bunch of data. We have access to a lot of data, but it's like we throw up on the customer. Here is this metric. Here's that metric. And I think we need to be able to take a step back and showcase, hey, how does this data, whether it's product usage, whether it's feature utilization, whatever it may be, how does it tie, going back to the objective of why they purchased your product or service, right? Because you have to be able to give it context. And then I think Brooke mentioned it a little bit earlier, context is key, right? So if I'm surfacing data around ROI, well, how does that compare? Is this good? Is this bad? And that's where like the benchmarking comes in, where being able to showcase, hey, here's what other customers that look like you experience with our product or service, and you're, red, yellow, green, or hey, a time could also be a benchmark in the sense that this is where you were last year. Look at the growth that you've experienced, right? And that's the so what. So I would say a big part of it is being able to bring data to the conversation, but in a very meaningful way that ties back to the objectives of why they purchased your product or service.
Yeah, and I think it's also the data points that are relevant to them. So do they care about monthly active users? Is it based on consumption? What are the KPIs or OKRs that are most relevant to them? And what are they reporting to their leadership or stakeholders on as well?
Totally. And that goes back to those objectives, right? As long as you have those objectives fully mapped out as to why they purchased, then you have the ability to map what metrics and data points you think will help them achieve those objectives.
Exactly. In a QBR example of showing value, right? We know that especially this year, in the year of 2023, we have to show value or else, right, to our customers. And I used to craft QBRs years ago, and it would be, okay, here are all the standard slides you show. And then we do like the product roadmap, dog and pony show. And then we ask what their goals are for next year, maybe in a slide in the last like 6 minutes of the meeting. And when you really break down building an effective story or having an effective leadership meeting, you need to start with the end in mind. So spending time up front saying, what do I want to get out of this meeting? And what do I need the customer to get out of this meeting, this event, this email, whatever it may be, right? This interaction. And starting with the end in mind and then reverse crafting your story. Because when you start with just a bunch of discrete building blocks, remember your customer the whole time in their mind is trying to create a story. Okay, you're showing me data slide, data slide, data slide. So what? I didn't like that point on that data slide. Maybe adoption isn't as good as I thought. And now we're going into the roadmap, but I don't see the thing on the roadmap that I thought was going to be on the roadmap. So now I'm in this place of feeling really sticky and not great. And now we're talking about goals for the future. So I'm going to say something like just get better adoption as my goal, instead of really opening up and being candid about our business needs. So you need to think about, if you were trying to have a conversation about next year goals and getting to some sort of revenue benchmark, now you're having an adoption conversation. You're in a really different place because the customers created their own different story throughout that meeting. And so thinking up front about what do I want the outcome to be, and then reverse engineering the story through slides, through data, through metrics, through examples, through benchmarks, so that you can take the customer on that journey and check in throughout it, you're going to get to the same place at the end, hopefully, where you can have that fruitful conversation that you want to have.
Yeah, I love
Brooke, I'm loving everything you're saying here. Great stuff.
Thank you.
One thing I'll add, and I think this also goes to the sort of dealing with when customers are unhappy about this stuff. Data. The data is important, right? But the data on its own, to what Brooke was saying, somebody once told me, like, data is like Legos. You can have a big bucket of it, and it's nothing, right? You got to dig through looking for stuff. And storytelling is when you've used those Legos and you've built yourself, a castle or a pirate ship or whatever it is. And I think that's. To Brooke's point, it can be so easy for people to lose sight of that. I can't tell you how many QBRs I've been in as the customer where they're throwing these data points at me, and I just don't care, either because it's not relevant to me, or because I've sort of forgotten why it was once relevant. A long time ago, I was at a company called TigerLead, and our product was fantastic. You get to work for a product that's like really delivers on all its promises, right? But eventually we ran into this problem where our customers, we were doing the first half of customer success. We were providing real value, but we weren't doing the second half, which is constantly reminding them of that. And we would start to have people even like call in to cancel their accounts, and they'd be like, yeah, I'm just not really sure that it's worth the money. It's a really expensive product. And we're looking at it like, well, you're making multi-million-dollar sales to all these leads we're providing, but it just becomes so normal for them that minor things would then have them saying, oh, maybe I don't want to do this, right? And we really had to start telling them that story, sort of reminding them, as Nick was saying, of like, here's the story of where you were before you signed up with TigerLead. Like, hey, remember what that was like when you never had enough leads, you didn't have the software, you weren't getting all this value. And remember how when you came here, you were saying, oh my God, my business is failing. I'm like barely selling any homes anymore. And now look at where you are, with all these great leads, and you've built up your team. And people really did forget all that stuff. I mean, people whose businesses had completely turned around in 3 years with us because of our product, they still forget that stuff. And you have to be reminding them, because it's amazing how quickly our brains adjust to thinking that whatever's around us is just the normal thing, and forget, all those pain points we had before whatever you're selling solved all those problems. And hopefully it really did solve all those problems.
Yeah, I think it's the recency latency principle, where people remember the first thing and the last thing that you tell them, but specifically the latter, the last thing that you tell them. So I think those touch points and gentle nudges or reminders definitely help.
One quick thing to add before we move on, Clay, I love the Lego analogy. Was the analogy I didn't know I needed. So thank you for that.
As soon as you hear it, you're like, why didn't I think of this a decade ago?
Yeah, a decade ago. And being a customer success leader, I've QA'd so many QBR decks before they went out to customers. And I'm always asking my team, why this slide? What's the point of the slide? So what, right? And if it's a slide with a graph and say it's weekly active users, so what, right? Has it gone up? Has it gone down? Is it impacting something else? Why are we showing it? And does it deserve the airtime? And then what's the takeaway? Literally write it on the slide for people. Don't make people do the mental work of being like, oh, it's gone up and to the right. Just write it on the slide. And that's part of your story, is you're building this story with all your Lego pieces. WA is going up, you're engaging new features, you're seeing returns, and you're taking that customer on that journey.
Even this, sorry, and one thing real quick, even this is, I've seen some questions about analogies and metaphors, and I'm like, this is a sort of a more traditional story, is like the Legos and the castle, right? And you go over it with your teams and such, and you sort of teach them this metaphor. And Brooke, to your point about QAing QBR decks and so on, one of the things that I would say to my CSMs sometimes when I'd be like going through a QBR or an email or what have you, and I'd say, hey, are you showing me the Legos or the castle? And they go, oh yeah, I'm showing you the Legos. No, I'll bring it back. I'll bring it back as the castle, right? And so that's sort of a more traditional story that helps people remember. It's hard to remember. Oh yeah, don't I'm supposed to arrange the data a certain way. It's really easy to remember. I've got pictures somewhere of like just a pile of Legos on the floor and then the castle, right? Real easy to remember those. Sorry, Nick, you were going to say something.
No, I think double clicking on the so what is like really, really important, especially when you do like use data. That so what is so important. I always say, like, you want to take data and you want to turn it into insights. Insights is that so what that you can go ahead and share. And I think the last thing that I think to consider is really, again, the touch point or where the customer is at in the journey. Ideally, the story is like building upon itself, right? So like, a QBR may look totally different in the first 3 months versus a QBR that you do right before the renewal. And so the hope is, going back, like bringing the customer on the journey, you want to be able to tell that story from onboarding to adoption to evangelism to ROI and value, and then renewal, right? And I think along those stages in the customer journey, you're going to have different personas. And going back to what we talked about earlier, really understanding those personas and what they care about is going to really dictate the data and the insights that you present in front of them.
Yeah. And Clay, I think Brooke, Nick, and I can all agree that you're the MVP of today's analogies between the fairy tales and the Lego castles. So thank you.
That's very flattering. Thank
you. Thank you for those gems. So how can storytelling aid us in diffusing difficult customer situations, or maybe addressing those customer complaints that we inevitably see?
Oh, I'll go. This one's fun. So I view storytelling as such an asset when you're in a tough situation. And I always, before you go into solve mode as a customer success professional, I always want to encourage, this is how I coach my team, like, what's the story the customer's telling themselves about this situation and where are they at? So if we're in a situation where the customer is frustrated that we haven't released something they expected, right? The story we might be telling ourselves is, well, we couldn't get to it on the roadmap and we had these way higher priority things. So of course we had to make some trade-offs. But the customer's going, this is the one thing that's going to unlock more value for my business. And I'm really disappointed. And I've stuck my neck out for this software vendor to try to keep it, safe and my budget protected. And now I'm not going to get this thing they told me was going to come. And I'm feeling really let down. And those are really different stories and emotional standpoints. And so I always encourage my team first is to really dig into what's the story the customer is telling themselves and where are they at, right? And that, if you're really honest upon reflection and you put yourself in their shoes and even ask the customer in some situations, let them vent and tell you their story. How does that feel? I understand, right? And hearing it from the customer themselves can really develop the empathy so that you can figure out, okay, what's our joint narrative going forward? I also think, beyond just one-to-one interactions, storytelling really helps when you're in dire straits, potentially. So I can't think about how many times because this happens everywhere, like dealing with something that might be kind of catastrophic, like data breaches or downtime. And you have to be able to communicate an effective story to potentially your entire customer base about, hey, something bad happened, right? And there's a real difference in getting an update from a software vendor that just says, hey, we were down for 3 hours, we're back up now. Like, I'm panicky. What do you mean? Okay, what happened? And is it going to happen again? And is my stuff safe, right? You're going to start to craft your own story as a customer around what happened and what went on. And am I safe? Should I be considering alternatives, right? Versus if that vendor gave you a really confident, hey, here's what happened. We know the cause. We identified it. We know the timestamps. Here's the steps we took to remediate it. Here's what we're going to do to prevent it going forward, right? You have a full story and suddenly you don't have as many questions probably about what happened. And you're going, okay, I understand. I understand the journey that you all went on over there while AWS was down and what you're going to do to prevent that. And I feel better, right? And so you've created some empathy on the customer side for you and probably some more trust, right? And so you really need to think about what's the story I'm telling the customer? What questions are they going to have about this negative interaction? And how do we start to craft then a joint narrative going forward? I'll stop there. I've never written that email before or anything, or have a template saved on my hard drive.
Well, Brooke, to your point, I like to anticipate the questions that they're going to ask and get ahead of it, whether it's preemptively replying to it or like drafting it or crafting the reply so that I'm ready. But I think anticipating those questions helps save a lot of surprises and time.
Yeah. And in a live conversation, if you can anticipate questions or objections, something that I've found really helpful, and this is part of telling a story about yourself, sort of, to the customer, is there's a tendency, I think, to say, okay, Nick, I'm going to sell Nick this product, and I know Nick is going to have these 3 objections because every customer of his type has these objections. So there's a tendency to say, okay, great. Now, in my pitch, I'm going to kind of monologue the solutions to those 3 objections before he even brings them up. And if there's just one, that's probably fine. But now I'm talking a whole bunch and he didn't actually even ask them. And what can be better sometimes is to say, Nick, here's a short little pitch. And Nick starts to say, well, but I'm worried about a problem with A. No problem, Nick. I've already solved that for you. Blam, here it is. Oh, well, what about B? I solved that too. Blam. What about C? That too. Done. And now Nick's saying, my God, this Clay guy, every problem I think of, he's already thought of it and he's already solved it. I tell him a problem, he's already solved it. And now Nick is thinking on some level, if only subconsciously, like, oh, this company, they really know their stuff. This guy really knows his stuff. If I have a problem, I don't need to worry about it. I can just tell Clay. He's apparently got all the answers. And this kind of tells that story to them about you and the company that you represent.
Yeah. Clay, that reminds me of Neuralink, of Clay is in my brain via Neuralink. So I hear you. So we have a lot of great questions from the audience. And if you would like to upvote any of the questions to make sure that our panelists ask them, please go into the Q&A and click upvote. But the very first question that received the most upvotes is, can you share a success story where you successfully transformed a high-risk customer into a highly satisfied one? And how did storytelling help you? So I think a lot of the attendees would love to hear tactical examples and real life stories or case studies. I think I've spoken a little bit to this already, I think, but I'll tell you a quick story of how I once used it to turn a furiously canceling customer into a canceled promoter. This was also when I was at TigerLead, and we had this gentleman call in about his account, and he'd been live with us for 4 months or something, and he was pissed. He was furious. He was spending so much money. He wasn't seeing anything. And our product was garbage. The leads must be garbage. His agents weren't booking any showings and all this stuff. And at the time, I was like a baby CSM.
And our CEO had recently been telling me about the importance of like, yeah, you don't want to argue with the customer, but like sometimes they say things that you shouldn't stand for, like all this stuff about our product. So I said to him, well, hey, Nick, I'm really sorry to hear you're having this experience, but I just want to make sure I see here we've been providing you $5 million leads, and your agents just aren't calling them. They're not texting them. I can see right here. They haven't even, here's one from 3 weeks ago. Nobody's contacted them. This person actually sent in requests for someone to contact them about buying this house. Nobody ever replied. So, I'm sorry that you've been unhappy, but we are providing the leads. We can't call them for you. That part's your job. This guy, dead quiet. Where can I see this? So I walk him through logging in, and I show him all this stuff. He says, hey, I need to put you on hold for a minute. Comes back 5 minutes later, takes me off hold, says, Clay, I got you on speakerphone with my whole team here. Can you go through some of those? Oh my God, this is so awkward. I'm like, yeah, we gave you this lead. Who's it assigned to? John Smith. John, you ain't called this lead? No. And just, a nightmare, awkwardness. Anyway, guy says he's going to look into it, calls back a few days later, says he's going to cancel after all. I'm thinking, oh man, I really thought I could make a difference. Months later, I'm at a conference, to just, meet with some of our clients. I'm waiting on a talk, and I hear people talking around me. And someone says, oh, I need to get some lead gen and software. Anybody know anybody? And before I can say anything, this guy says, oh yeah, this company, Tiger Lead, I tried them and they were great, and my agents sucked. They weren't calling the leads. I had to cancel because my agents just wouldn't do the work. But man, they were great, and all this stuff. And it's that same guy. And I was just thinking, okay, so he just told 6 people that they should buy our product, even though he had to cancel because he didn't make any ROI. And, I think of that a lot, of like, we could have just let that guy go, right? He was so mad there wasn't going to be any saving him. But because we told that story, because we sort of showed him the value that was being provided from us, even though he left as a promoter. When before he was going to cancel, telling everybody how we were thieves who'd ripped him off.
Yeah, I think learning from churn is a really important aspect. Brooke, Nick, any additional success stories you want to share of transforming an at-risk customer to a highly satisfied one?
Yeah. One context I think storytelling really matters is customer training. And I learned that the hard way with an at-risk customer. So a very large account at a past startup. This was a very typical case of like, we're selling to a big dog and we're trying to look bigger than we are as a company. And we're trying to build this plane as we're flying it, right? In all intents of that phrase. So we are going through a global rollout of a software solution to thousands of sales reps across the United States. And we severely underestimated, right, what the training needed to look like to inspire change. So we and the customer put in all of these resources, this energy and this effort into launching this tool to like crickets and zero adoption. And suddenly we're spinning, right? Because we're going, whoa, what's going on, right? We're not getting any adoption. We're not seeing logins. We're getting tons of support tickets that are like, I lost my password. And we're very quickly off the rails. And so everybody's gut reaction internally was just like, throw more people at the problem. We got to run more trainings. We got to do more comms. We got to send more emails. And in reality, putting more people on that problem without stepping back and really thinking like, why aren't people adopting, didn't get us anywhere. What we found essentially when we really dug into the trainings that were happening, because some were run by the customer, is the trainings going through the software of basically point and click. Here's all the buttons, right? Here's how you do the things. Here's how you log in. Okay, go back to your desk. And at no point in that training was there a story that the sales rep, the end user, could connect with and say, oh, I understand why I should do this and why it's important to me. I understand the benefit I'm going to get from this. I understand how to put this into my daily role, right? We basically gave them a product tutorial and an overview of all the icons on the screen, and then said, okay, go figure out how to implement this into your daily role. So some of the lessons learned from this customer massively changed our entire training and enablement strategy going forward. And ultimately, it was very costly for us because we had to essentially go through and retrain people. And you only get one chance at that first impression. So you can only go back and retrain so much of the population and capture it. So adoption did improve over time, but man, it was a slog for years then with this customer to get them where they needed to be.
Yeah, I think
I feel like you just gave a 90-second summary of an entire talk I gave a few weeks ago about this problem. Yes, like everyone's onboarding. We call it onboarding. It's really just paperwork and glorified tutorial videos, right? That's 98% of people's onboarding. When it should be like, yeah, you got to teach them how to use the software, but more importantly, you have to teach them how to be successful, and that involves telling them the story. Hey, here's you. Here's what you're going to do. Here's where it's going to get you, and that's the place you want to be. If you're not telling that story, then you're just a YouTube video. Click here to send an email. Blah blah blah. No one cares. They're disengaged. 5 minutes in, they've already forgotten everything.
So that's a good segue to another question posted in the Q&A that received quite a bit of upvotes, and that is, any tips or tricks for storytelling with customers who have cameras off and seem to be disengaged from the conversation, specifically in this Zoom era?
I can get started on that one. I love having like a conversation and having it be collaborative. So I think asking the right questions, right, is a great way to engage the customer or the prospect, right? And if you are getting those like one word answers, like double clicking on that to really try to understand, like you want them to talk as much as possible, right? And so I love, answering a question with a question, right? Or really, really trying to double click on what their objectives are. And if they say, hey, my objective is productivity, I really want to do more with less. Well, what specifically? Is there a specific segment? Is there a company OKR that you guys have? How are you guys defining that? What is the metric? So I really try to have a collaborative conversation. And for me, what sparks that is usually just, questioning the person and trying to get more out of them.
You for one thing, I would say cameras off. Who cares? You don't need a camera. I did 10 years of customer success without, I don't think, ever doing a video call with a customer. You can do it on the phone. You don't need the camera on. But if they're disengaged, call it out. Maybe it's a crappy day for them. You know what? Maybe they're getting a divorce. Maybe the principal just called their kid got busted selling whatever drugs the kids are doing these days in high school. Maybe they're pissed at you. Maybe you're asking the wrong questions. Maybe this whole conversation, you've misunderstood what they wanted to get. And I don't mean call it out like, hey, what the hell's wrong with you? But just say, hey, Brooke, is this a bad time? It seems like you're a little distracted right now. So do you want to reschedule? Would there be a better time? Or, is there something else going on? And just see what they say. Like I said, there's no sense chasing somebody who's not engaged, but usually if somebody's giving you their time, if they're showing up to a meeting, they almost always want to be engaged with you, and if they're not engaged, then things have probably gone to a place they're not interested in.
Yeah. Actually, that's a really good point. The rescheduling is actually a really, really great tactic, especially if the person that's on the call, somebody that was invited, you never had interactions with them before, and the rescheduling has definitely been a great tactic that has worked in the past for me as well. So that's a really good call out.
And I've had people do it to me a couple of times where I'm like, oh yeah, you know what? Yeah, this week blew up and I'm so distracted. I'm just not here right now. Actually, yeah, I didn't even think about that because this week blew up on me. But now that you mention it, yeah, let's do this in a week, and I'll be in a much better place to engage in a week.
And that's a very humanizing approach and having customer empathy, which is important. I personally have been on calls where leaders have asked their direct reports to turn on the cameras, or they've set the expectation that they expect them to be on video, or they'll send a gentle reminder on Slack in advance of, hey, we're jumping on this call. I'd like the video to be on. So if they need time to prep for it, they can. But the opposite of that humanizing experience of setting that expectation that you'd like to see everyone and to put a face to a name.
I think I really like the pause and checking in. I think you can also give people an out. Sometimes if this is a strategy where being super direct doesn't feel comfortable to you, of saying, hey, sometimes when my calls are really quiet, it means like I'm missing the mark and people aren't understanding me, or I've maybe gone too fast. So like giving a hypothetical there to give them an out to say, no, I understand. Or actually, wait, can you go back 2 slides? Because I'm stuck back there and we've moved on. So making sure that you can kind of check in around, hey, sometimes when this is happening and it's quiet on a call, it means I'm missing it. Or maybe you're having a side discussion in the room and I'm not privy to it, or something's going on. So you can give them some examples of things that might be sticking the call a little bit. If you're a direct person like me, I'll just wait quietly and make it really awkward sometimes. And sometimes you kind of have to force it and just ask your question and let it sit there and just wait. And then sometimes you have to say to people, I'll wait. And you just have to wait for the first person to crack and get weird about it. But it sometimes does unlock the wheels depending upon your relationship with somebody. And you can even say, hey, I know you're thinking about something and you're struggling with it, but you're not sharing it with me. What's going on? Right. And so trying to create a way to unlock their internal dialogue, assuming they are present, right? And they're able emotionally to be there with you.
I got a great trick for that too. If you have trouble like being silent until they say something, if you're like, oh my God, it's been so long, someone's got to say something. It only feels that way, like in your head. Open up a stopwatch app, your phone, the desktop, whatever, start timing it. When you see the seconds tick by, you're like, oh yeah, it's only actually been 7 seconds. God, it felt like eternity, right? It's like when the radio goes silent, right? And that a second of radio silence is an infinity. If you're looking at how long it's been, you're like, oh, it's not been that long. I'll wait.
Yeah, that awkward silence and being comfortable in that silence and learning to get comfortable in it if you're not already there. But totally right on the stopwatch, 3 seconds or 7 seconds. And the grand scheme of things pales in comparison. So another question from the Q&A, and please continue upvoting so we can bring these questions to our panelists, comes from Matt, and he is interested in knowing how much do you rely on your internal teams to help build the backdrop of your storytelling? So whether it's your product leaders, your sales team, do they help you frame that story?
I think it starts there, right? But I would say the bigger stakeholder is your customer, right? And so like having them be a bigger input into that process, I think is imperative because they're the ones that ultimately are going to be reacting to the story. And so the more you can get them involved, I think the better. But yeah, it does start with product marketing or product. Like they can help kind of put together the outline or help put together the initial version of the narrative. But at the end of the day, I think the stakeholders that are most important are, going back to what we said earlier, you want to bring the customer on the journey, and that requires you getting their input on what's working and what's not.
Yeah, and I know that I've worked with sales team in the past to help. Why did they purchase the software? Kind of what was in it for them when they initially bought, and knowing that pre-sales context can help with the storytelling post-sales and why they made that initial investment.
I have an interesting take on this question. I think, especially when you get to the point where you're at like the executive table with the other departments. Nick, I think you make a great point that like our story comes from the customer and we are the customer advocates at that table. And it's really important that you, as a representative of your book of business or your segment or your entire customer base, take the time to understand the story you're telling to the rest of the company about what's going on with customers. I think oftentimes, even when we're going into an internal meeting, that might be the weekly, the weekly update or the monthly all hands or whatever it is, we fall prey to just presenting data about customers. And we kind of fall back into that trap of, all right, here's, average users going up, our onboarding times are on time, renewal rates good, awesome. And we're not telling the story to everybody else at the company who's putting their blood, sweat, and tears into this too, about here's what's going on with the customer base. Here's what insights we're driving from the conversations we're having with customers. And here are trends that we're seeing in the data and in our conversations that we think would be valuable for you all to understand. And I think that's really how you elevate your profile internally, by crafting the story around what's going on with the customers, and how also you make sure that you're the author of that story. Yeah. You own the customer relationship. And it's very easy that if you're just spitting out data to folks, that they start to author a story that maybe you've got a byline in there maybe, but it's no longer your own. And so I've learned that lesson a couple of times over different ways. But it's part of owning, I think, the customer story.
Yeah. And I think actually a tactical, just to follow up on that, what I've seen work really, really well in my prior experiences, even at LinkedIn, on how to convince, those internal stakeholders. The one thing I love about customer success is we have our hands in a lot of cookie jars, right? Like we work with the customer, we work with product, we work with marketing. And, sometimes these additional stakeholders are not in those interactions where we tell the stories, right? And a great way to do that is either invite them on a call, right? Or even we have technology today where you can send them a Gong recording or a chorus recording and be like, hey, here is how, when we talk about messaging A, B, or C, or when we talk about value, here's how the customer has reacted. Here's the objections that have come up, right? And so I think definitely leverage some of the technology that is out there to bring your internal stakeholders on that journey so that they can see your perspective and why you're coming to the table with a certain recommendation, right?
And I know we are coming up on the top of the hour at 3:00. So if anyone has to jump off for other meetings, you are welcome to hop off. We will stay on for an additional 15 minutes to go through some of the additional Q&A. But for those of you that joined, thank you. For those of you that want to stay on and continue on our Q&A, we welcome you to stay on for another 15. So another question posted was, can you all discuss strategies for telling the story on a regular basis, reminding customers of value, showing them progress over time beyond the infrequent touch points of QBRs? And then she was referring to maybe weekly, monthly best practices.
I like, QBRs, we've used QBRs a lot. We've talked about that as a vehicle. And I love the idea of not relying on that to be the moment of telling a value-based story. I think from a practical tip standpoint, having a single visual, whether it be a slide or an email or an image that is able to be something that you use consistently, both pre-sales, through the sales journey, all the way through value realization, is really powerful here, right? It can be something that you come back to. So the most effective companies I've worked with that do this, right, it might be something like a scorecard or a maturity model or something light where they're coming back to, hey, we started here, right? And now we're here, we're going to this place next. And they're constantly reinforcing that on calls. And you can bring back a simple image or a scale or a number or a scorecard on a regular basis and be like, hey, we're always checking in on these things. Really advanced companies then can productize this sort of stuff and start to actually then bring that into their product lifecycle and say, customers themselves can go in and see where they're at and get value reinforcement on their own. And so weaving it across the different touch points really helps there so that it's not 4 months post-implementation. And then for the first time ever, you are talking about value in this totally new framework with a customer. That's pretty hard.
I love one-pagers. I think this is something that we've seen a lot of success with, where you are sending it on a weekly or monthly basis. And we have seen, to Brooke's point, whether you have the scorecard on the one-pager supplemented with some qualitative feedback or recommendations, it's been the catalyst to help us get meetings with decision makers, right? So like sending that out frequently, and then all of a sudden you see an uptick or you see a downtick, right? Executive raises their hand like, hey, I just saw this and been getting this. I'd love to double click and chat about this. And it becomes a catalyst to getting time because everyone's busy, right? When you do meet with someone, you want to make sure it's really, really useful. So one pagers have been something that we've seen prove to be very, very successful with our customers.
I love that. Thank you. So Ellie Torado asked, what are some good analogies? So Clay, maybe this one's for you. As far as storytelling to encourage customers to adopt the product, what are some of your favorite analogies?
Okay, I hope you don't. I hope Ellie, I hope you don't hate me for this answer. I'd say that's the wrong question. If you want to encourage customers to adopt the product, you want to lay out for them. The whole Joseph Campbell hero's journey thing, and you had some disagreements with it, but you want to lay out for them something like that, right? You want it to be something like, Nick, here's where you are today, right? We're onboarding you. We're in those early stages where we're trying to get you to adopt the product. Here's where you are today. Here's the problem you're facing. Here's how we're going to get you past it. Here's what you're going to do. Here's what some of this we're going to do for you, but here's what you're going to do, whether that's training your team, making sure that people understand the importance of this product and how it's going to change their day to day, whatever. And here's that happy ending you're going to get to. Because the thing is, people who see that they're on track to a happy ending, they start walking faster. And eventually they start running. People who aren't sure where they're going, they're kind of slow. They're kind of looking around, trying to figure out where they are, where they're headed. So I would say if people are slow to adopt the product, if a few customers are slow to adopt the product, you want to look into what's going on with those customers. If your customers overall are slow to adopt the product, you haven't really shown them the path, or maybe you haven't cleared the path of some obstacles. Because like I said, if they see, hey, keep heading down this way, you get to that happy ending, they start running. And I shouldn't say they start running. They start speeding up towards that happy ending.
They will amble in that direction, maybe. It's a very gentle term. I love that answer, Clay. And to add here, something that did help with that customer I mentioned previously, who was very much one of these customers, was being able to have a peer help tell the story. And so that is another just tactical tip you can take, Ellie, is you still need everything Clay described, because somebody has to be the first person to step into that journey on their team. But if you can take the first set of peers right through that journey, they can then call back to everybody else and go, come on, I'm already in the really great place. I'm already seeing the results, right? And sometimes a peer's voice is much stronger than our own as an outsider.
I love that. So the next question that had quite a few upvotes, and it brings us back to, Nick, what you mentioned regarding benchmarking. And sorry, let me just scroll back up. Okay. Do you find that if a customer is struggling to find value or success in your product, that it is better to drive home the success that they've had with you in any capacity, or to drive the success to similar customers and the success they have had? So other customers in the same industry, or to focus on the things that have gone well for them specifically?
I think my take on this is they probably don't want to hear about other customers, especially if they're coming to you unhappy. I think it's probably good to focus on what has gone well and how you can replicate that more consistently. I would say the second component there is maybe just have that hard conversation as to like why things aren't adopting, and just be direct with them and say, hey, let's sit down and unpack this together to see how we can improve this, right? So I would probably start with, what has gone well, where you've had success, but then have that hard conversation, especially if it's early on. I think that's another thing that we often, have a problem with in customer success is I think it's okay to deliver a bad message, especially if it's early on in the process. I think what's worse is when you deliver a bad message like right before the renewal. Like, hey, you're not adopting at all and your renewal is next month. But if you're like 3 months in the onboarding process, there's been a blocker or whatever it may be, if you're communicating that appropriately and it goes back to like setting expectations, you can get ahead of it, right? Yes, you're delivering bad news week after week, but then it's like, hey, Nick is being proactive or Brooke is being proactive and communicating what's going on. Now we at least have the time to go and fix it together, and because we're trying to accomplish a certain goal that they've set. So I think communicating really early on and being proactive is a great way to kind of overcome some of the bad results.
I think it depends on, are they struggling to find value because they're not doing what they need to be doing, or because you and the company you represent aren't doing what you need to be doing? Because if it's the first one, you got to tell them, if they're not doing what they need to do and you focus on success. This has been a way that I have seen big churn reductions within like a couple of months of me joining a company and being like, hey, you guys need to stop telling them, oh yeah, you're only 10% of the way towards your adoption a month in, but that's not so bad. We want to be positive. I'm like, no, you come in and say, hey, something's wrong. Here's where other customers are at. This is what, and they're there because they're doing X, Y, Z. We got to get you doing X, Y, Z. If it's because your company is failing, your products, not updating on schedule, or whatever it is that they expect of you that you're not delivering, then it's better to talk about, I think, the success they have had with you. Although really, it's best just not to be in that situation at all if you can help it.
I think bad news can be valuable, right? And so just because it's not a great message, as in it's not a good news message, doesn't mean it's not really valuable to the customer. It was really valuable to Clay's customer, who he basically outed that the call center team wasn't doing any work. That was valuable to that leader. And that's a hard one, right? But I think we have to pull those things apart a little bit. It doesn't have to be all good news to be a good story. And I think part of the value that you add as an expert, as an independent expert, especially from the consulting side, is being able to hold up a mirror and say, here's where we are struggling, and here's what we could do about that. And that's where benchmarks can be a really great asset to compare, right, to those other customers and say, hey, this is a great opportunity where you could be here if we did these things. And I know you can get here because other customers are doing it, but we need to make some changes together.
I think just one last thing to add there. I think if going back to the question earlier around like, hey, how do you, outside of just like QBR where it's a formal meeting, this is where some of these other touch points, right, where it's not a formal meeting, but you're sending out that scorecard or the one pager that has their data compared to a benchmark, or hey, you are not using this, you are using this, and you're sending that pretty frequently, I think can shed light to either your admin or your decision maker or whoever it is at the company that you're working with, where you're at in that process or where you're at in that journey. So I think those touch points are really, really crucial to then hopefully set you up for that QBR or for that renewal down the road.
Here's another analogy for you. If I say, Brooke, you have a chronic illness, that's bad news, right? Nobody likes that news. Except that one of my family members spent 2 years dealing with all these health problems, could never figure out what was going on. Symptoms kept changing, doctor after doctor. Oh, maybe it's this, maybe it's that.
No.
They saw somebody who, knew you have this particular chronic illness. That was good news for her, right? Because now she knew, and now she could start treating it, right? And so, yeah, you say, oh, well, that's a bad news thing to hear. But actually, if it lets them solve the problem, then that's not bad news. Maybe it's not great news, but now she's doing great because now she knows what to do and how to treat it. So she's not just having, years of various, different health issues. And I think that's a way you can look at, telling somebody,
Oh, no.
I think Clay may be cutting off there, but I love what he's mentioning regarding framing it in a positive light instead of framing it negative and sharing the positives and putting it that positive mindset when you start the story.
Yeah, the way I've always put it to my teams, especially when we're talking about churn or bad news at the customer level, it's always better to know. It's always better to know, honestly, what's going on. It does me no good if you have happy ears and you're only telling me good news and all the great things that are happening with customers. It's way better to know where the risk is and to hear the bad news and go ahead and take the medicine, right? And figure it out.
Exactly. Well, with that, we are coming up at the end of our session here today. I want to thank all of our guests for joining me today and everyone who's joining us from LinkedIn Live. One final note, great CSMs know they don't have all the answers, but they know where to get them. That's why we created our CSM Mastermind to harness the knowledge and experience of the community to help improve everyone. So I hope you got something out of today's discussion, and we will see you at our next event on June 21st, where we will discuss the art of influence. So check out our website to find out more and to register. And we hope that everyone has a great rest of your day. Stay safe and stay healthy. Thanks, everyone.